Привіт and greetings from Berehove in the west of Ukraine. And I have a quite interesting video, I think, today. Imagine this, a Brit in the Ukrainian army in this war between Russia and Ukraine being interrogated by a Brit in the Russian forces. Well, that's actually what happened pretty recently. Aidan Aslan, a British citizen who was in the Ukrainian Marines in Mariupol, was captured and then interrogated by a guy who claims he's a journalist, who's also Brit, Graham Phillips. We'll get on that in the video. It's now day 65 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For reference, for when I'm filming this, let's get into the video. Поехали!
SAR Experience.
So Aidan Aslan, I actually first saw him back, I think it was in January, because he was being interviewed before the invasion started on February 24th by the Western media, and he was in the Ukrainian forces in Donbass. So he's a Brit who joined apparently the Ukrainian forces a couple of years ago. He's in the Ukrainian Marines, and he had been in Mariupol. He had been, some clips of him there had gotten out because he'd been sending to his family so we can see him. And he was in a situation where they ran out of ammunition, I guess, other supplies like food and water. So they felt that they had no other option but to surrender to the Russian forces in Mariupol. There's still actually Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol defending an area of the city called Azovstal on day 65 when I'm speaking, at least. So pretty crazy story in the sense that that city, first I believe, all the hype about the Russian military at the beginning of the war would have fallen in the first day or two minimum. And it's actually day 65. So Aidan was captured, and one of the big controversies that Russia created was that Russian forces said that they would consider basically all foreigners in the Ukrainian military as mercenaries. Now, under international and Geneva Conventions, a mercenary is not entitled to Geneva Convention protections. So you'll be in a very vulnerable situation if you are considered or classified a mercenary. Now, he seems to have been there. It's documented he was there before the invasion, so he definitely enjoyed then. And he was ostensibly in the Ukrainian military for the last few years. So wouldn't really seem to me to be a mercenary, but that's actually really dangerous for him. They also said that they would execute all mercenaries. So that's the situation in which he was captured. Now, who's the other guy who claims to be interviewing him? That would be Graham Phillips. Now, who is Graham Phillips? That is a quite controversial character, I feel we're going to get into. He is also a Brit. He has a YouTube channel, and basically he came to prominence by filming from the Russian side, we'll say the Russians' perspective, during when these invasions started by Russia of Ukraine in 2014, with first annexation of Crimea and then the war in Donbass. So he was actually there, we could say, an embedded journalist filming from the perspective of the Russian separatists in Donbass. So he made a lot of videos. Some of them got a lot of views. One's with a guy called Jivi, who basically, and this is the part that's relevant to this whole interrogation, is he on camera abused many Ukrainian POWs, and there's a lot of stuff that made him seem very unsavory. But this Brit, Graham Phillips, was there filming with him, and let me just play a few clips of Graham Phillips and some of his behavior. He also then himself started, from what I can see, abuse Ukrainian prisoners of war when they were trying to do a prisoner exchange. Pretty unsightly. Let me play that clip.
Ты просто зомби. Я не зомби, я образованный человек, мне 46 лет. Я вырос и родился на этой земле. Я образованный человек и вырос здесь. Никто меня не зомбировал.
So there you see where Graham Phillips is basically harassing a guy who seems to have lost his arms when he's been exchanged in a prisoner exchange, calling him a zombie. It's pretty distasteful. So, I mean, he's there in the capacity of being a journalist, and, he films a lot with Patrick Lancaster. Has also done a video about up here in a card down below. Then you have a clip of Graham Phillips in, I think it's the Ukrainian ambassador to Austria, where he starts to question him on the street with his camera presence. So let's see what happens there.
I'm the most honest journalist in the world.
You are not a journalist at all.
I'm the best journalist in the world.
Small
you don't know what journalism is. You don't even know.
Hate between Ukraine and Russia. T is very... You're an enemy. Enemy of Ukraine, enemy of truth, enemy of
Нет.
everything
Я
human.
только
You
за
are a
правду.
small human being
Это из-за того,
who
я за
feeds
правда,
on the
что ты
hate,
считаете,
on the
что ты
hate
думаешь, что
between
я враг.
Ukraine and Russia.
I'm the most honest
You are a
journalist in the
small
world.
human being
You are the supporter
who
of terrorism.
feeds on hate.
You are the supporter of a
Without
genocide.
hate, you would be nothing.
That's not
Without the
true.
hate between Ukraine and
I'm
Russia,
the most honest
you
journalism-
would be
I'm the most
nothing.
honest
This is
journalist
one
in the
thing I
world.
wanted to tell you.
The most honest
Without
journalist.
hate, you would be
Can you
nothing.
tell me? No, I'm only
and
for
you
love
are
and
nothing.
truth.
So there, I'm not sure if you can make your mind up whether you think he's a journalist or should be categorized in some other way. I'm going to play a few clips for you. So there you see, yeah, the Ukrainian ambassador there is just telling, well, without this hate between Russia and Ukraine, you wouldn't be in a thing, because that's basically what his, we'll say, infamy, Graham Phillips, is built on.
Pays women to have sex with him.
What are you even talking
are
about?
a sex tourist. I read your blogs. You are a despicable human being.
Sasha!
Without this war, you
What
would
are
be
you even
nothing.
talking about?
And you are nothing. And
You're
please
speaking a load of
look up
Are you a,
his
you're a
blog.
clown.
The blog of this guy.
Okay.
Who is
So tell me.
nothing.
So there he's making a reference to Graham Phillips having a blog about sex tourism, paying for sex for prostitutes, reviewing brothels. And actually there's an article in the Kiev Post, it's now a newspaper that's defunct, that Graham Phillips wrote, and he was lamenting the demise of a barge that apparently was a brothel in Kiev. It was called the Kiev Palace, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd actually read that article when I was researching for nightclubs in Kiev many years ago. And then when I did a little bit of research before this video, find out it was Graham Phillips who wrote it. So yeah, that's basically his background in journalism before this, before these conflicts between Russia and Ukraine starting in 2014. Was writing a few articles from the Kiev Post, having his blog about being a sex tourist. Let's see, let's go ahead and see. You can tell me how professional he is in this next clip.
I wasn't afraid of you.
Are they Nazis?
And now
Answer
you
the question.
can go
Answer
to
the
your
question.
country, which
Azov
is Russia.
Battalion.
Okay?
Tell me about the Azov Battalion.
I'm ambassador. Please
Tell
don't,
me about the
don't
Azov
touch me.
Battalion.
Don't assault me.
Podornik, the Gandorn.
So there you see he pushes the Ukrainian ambassador, insults him on the street, and then starts calling him names. Do you think this is normal journalistic professionalism? This video actually is no longer his channel. It's up on another channel. I'll put a link down below to these clips. So that's some of the history of Graham Phillips. There's a lot more stuff where he's on the front, pretty similar to a lot of coverage from Patrick Lancaster, actually in Donbass on the front and interviewing soldiers from the Russian forces perspective. And actually there are photos of Graham Phillips receiving a medal from the FSB, which is the Russian security services. Again, independent journalist like he has on his YouTube channel. Starting to look a little bit non-independent, unindependent. So then the war starts. So actually he went off and wasn't filming so much about Donbass after a few years. He went off and did some other things. I can see it on his YouTube channel. And then he came back to Ukraine, where he's actually persona non grata. He's not allowed to enter Ukrainian territory, according to the Ukrainian government. But of course, if he goes with the Russian-occupied territory, he can get in. So he actually went in the north to Chernihiv, and he reappeared on that three-country point. So you got the borders between Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. And then he suddenly filmed the clip there at the beginning of this invasion around February 24th. Let me play for you what he actually posted originally on his YouTube channel. Now, this was actually taken down off YouTube, violated the terms and conditions, because he refers to that in another clip later that he released in English. But this one he released in Russian, and yeah, it's kind of both disgusting and amusing at the same time, I think.
Три сестры. Представь. Одна сестра умница, красавица, великолепная. Вторая сестра тоже такая классная, умница, красивая. Вот такие хорошие. Красавица, красавица. То представь, третья сестра, оказывается, конченая сука. Вот. Надо что-то с ней делать. Правильно? Ну, я так думаю.
Can you imagine? Russia's just invaded Ukraine using Belarusian territory to transit their soldiers and attack the country, and he starts calling Ukraine a whore. Kind of the amusing part is that he's a sex tourist blogger in his former career, so he probably knows a lot about prostitutes, so I guess that's why he used that analogy. What kind of journalist is this? This guy's going to be a journalist, and this is the way he shows up on the border. So as you'll see there, he is not wearing a press uniform, whatever, and, normal press tie with a helmet and identifying himself as an international journalist. He's wearing basically civilian clothes and got an identifying mark, which is these ribbons for the Russian colors, basically identifying himself maybe not as a soldier, but definitely part of the Russian forces, because he's not wearing anything that identifies him as being impressed. Again, another element about whether you should consider whether he is a journalist or is he something else within the Russian forces, because he's already been given a medal by the FSB. Let's see, so that's how he shows up. He has suitcases and he has the Russian symbol Z, which is kind of like a swastika, and the V, they're two symbols for the war. So, independent journalist. Now, it's up to you to decide whether you think this guy is actually a journalist or is he just a propagandist for the Russian forces, because he's appearing like a combatant. He's not carrying a gun, although there are a lot of photos of him shooting stuff or posing with guns from earlier in the conflict, but you know, he's not engaged in actually conflict, from what I can tell, actually shooting during the fighting. And then he basically decides to interview, in inverted commas, Aiden Aslin, the captured British soldier in the Ukrainian forces. So remember that Aiden's position is that Russians have said that they consider all foreigners in the Ukrainian military to be mercenaries, and mercenaries they will execute, kill. So imagine being captured in those circumstances where they're basically saying they're going to kill you, but he has no other choice to surrender, he feels, and take a risk on that. And you know, under Geneva Conventions, you cannot interview POWs, prisoners of war. Now, the Ukrainian side, by the way, has been interviewing and releasing footage of a lot of interviews with Russian POWs. That's also illegal under international laws. It's also pretty despicable that they do that and they violate the Geneva Conventions. That is an excuse, obviously, doing the same from the Russian side. It's obviously on the lower scale of war crimes. We've seen, you know, allegations of rape, looting, murder, of civilians, targeting of civilians, possible chemical attacks, possible mass murders. The whole war is illegal in the first place, so there's a lot of war crimes that have been going on. So this is obviously on the lesser scale to interrogate / interview a POW and publish it, but it's still in contravention, in violation of the Geneva Convention, so it would be considered a war crime. Graham Phillips decides what he's going to start his interview, but trying to wiggle his way out of the fact that this will be a war crime and it will be against the terms and conditions of posting on YouTube, just like when he called Ukraine a whore. That also got struck, and he's had issues with other videos that have been taken down, so I guess he's probably got a lot of strikes on YouTube, and I'm not sure how long I'm not sure if he's able to monetize or how long his channel might last if he keeps getting strikes. So he tries to wiggle his way out of it. I'm not going to play the interview clip. It's already been taken down off YouTube from his channel. I did find it elsewhere. I'm not going to post it because obviously it's promoting a war crime if I do that. And I also don't post on my social media any interviews or interrogations by the Ukrainian military that they film of Russian soldiers either, because I'm not going to circulate things that are of that nature. But I think for illustrative purposes, just the beginning, which offers no propaganda value, him trying to wiggle his way out of the Geneva Conventions, I think he's actually really trying to just get out of the YouTube terms and conditions. But anyways, he's kind of trying to do both at the same time. So let's watch him.
So we've got the camera running here. I'm also going to roll camera now. I'd like to just say a couple of words that filming prisoners of war, although Aiden is, I will say this as it is, a mercenary, there are protocols governing that as per the Geneva Convention. I shall be adhering not only to them, given that Aiden is, as I say, a mercenary, those don't necessarily apply, but because we're all good, nice, polite people here, we shall adhere to not only the protocols and the covenants of the Geneva Convention, but also this will be uploaded to YouTube, so the applicable YouTube guidance. Aiden, would just like to confirm that you're speaking of your own will. There's not going to be any pressure or anything like that. You are fed, watered. Basically, you agree to.
Yeah, I agreed to this. I asked for this.
Now, you can't do that. Think about it. If all you had to do when you're interrogating a prisoner and going to film a POW is get them to say that they're consenting to it, then obviously it wouldn't be very hard when you got a bunch of soldiers and you get a prisoner, right? They would just basically beat him until he agreed to say on camera, yeah, I consent freely. So obviously you cannot actually give away your rights under that. You cannot consent to being interviewed if you're a POW legally for that very reason. So there you see Aiden. Now, he made a last post the day before he was captured by the Russian forces, and on it he did not have the mark that, it's maybe not clear in that clip, I'll show maybe a clip of the mark he has in his head, but yeah, he seems to have received that between when he posted his last clip and him showing up for the interview here. So there's a very high probability that was done after he was captured. Of course, we can't say 100%, but highly likely that he received that. So in addition to the fact that the Russian forces said that they don't consider him to be protected under the Geneva Conventions, so basically he's basically under pain of death to agree to go on this interview, and then you have these kind of weasel attempt to get around both the Geneva Conventions and YouTube's terms and conditions and you can see his answer, not very convinced that he is consenting. So basically, ignore the entire interview. It's just it's coerced clearly from that. I said as a former lawyer, that's just a non-starter, and you cannot consent to being put on camera in this way under Geneva Conventions as POW. Actually reminds me of when, the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein did this a lot with captured U.S. servicemen. He'd basically have to go on and say, the American government is terrible, dead to America, the people here are so great, Iraq, to try and, obviously so that Americans would see that and maybe turn on their government, but you're not allowed to do that, basically. It is a war crime. It's a war crime that serves a propaganda purpose for the Russian government in this case. So I did mention also that there is Patrick Lancaster, who I already reviewed or reacted to, and Graham Phillips have filmed together because they're basically in the same forces, the Russian forces, beforehand, between 2014 up until 2022, that would have been in Donbass and the occupied parts of Donbass by the Russian forces. And now with this new invasion, they're in Mariupol and they're filming all the time. So, Patrick Lancaster, I've never seen him on, do any of this kind of stuff on camera, like abuse prisoners of war, or commit a war crime, or encourage a war crime. I may be critical of his work, but I've never seen him stoop that low. Definitely not on camera. There's no evidence that. This guy, Graham Phillips, seems to revel in it, absolutely, in this kind of despicable behavior. So he kind of comes across as the evil sidekick to Patrick Lancaster, but it gets better because, Graham Phillips had, the big channel, and Patrick Lancaster was not so well known before, the February 24th invasion by Russia. And then he's, since then his channel has exploded in terms of views. I don't think it's monetizable, his channel, if I understand correctly. But anyways, people, crowdsource or crowdfund, or he gets money from somewhere to make these videos. But that seems to have ruffled the feathers of Graham Phillips. And remember what the Austrian ambassador said about him being a small, pathetic man, more or less. Well, watch this clip.
Because otherwise you could end up potentially coming in running around like a headless chicken, ranting on in broken English about how you're the only English-speaking journalist on the scene, and constantly begging for crowdfunding, and we would not want that, would we? In fact, the opposite. Let me show you what we're passing here.
So there you see, he's talking about Patrick Lancaster. He seems a bit upset, maybe a little bit of jealousy that the other YouTuber embedded with the Russian forces in Mariupol is getting more attention than Graham. Seems to have hit his ego a little bit. It's been the top foreign dog in the, metaphorically speaking, in the Russian forces embedded there with their cameras, not with their guns, in Mariupol. And there's a lot of, the Austrian ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador earlier was talking about how he was nothing beforehand. That's actually something, when you think about it, if you were a Russian or a local guy from Donbass who was filming like that, well, yeah, he might have some status and get some notoriety based on his work, but he doesn't get the same attention as a Brit or an American like Patrick Lancaster is actually being in the Russian forces there. It kind of gives, kind of like extra high status because he's from the West and that he's supporting the Russian side and doing their propaganda for them. So locally, he must get so much attention in Donbass in particular, and also Russia. And I know this because once I was going through security at Minsk airport, and they saw that I had a camera, the guy at the security, and he says, "Oh, so you're a journalist or YouTuber?" I said, "Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. Like, my YouTube channel was not political whatsoever before this invasion, so completely different content. And I wish I could just go back to that, that this war would end in a Ukrainian victory, and that would be the end of it." And yeah, I said, "I have this YouTube channel." And he said, "Oh, I've met your compatriot and fellow YouTuber, Graham Phillips. Oh, I love his work so much." And I was like, "Oh." So yeah. I didn't say anything untoward when I was going through mid-security, of course, but yeah, I mean, for me, shameful that we share, you know, a similar platform and we have a similar nationality. Anyways, so there you go. But he does stand out because of that, and he gets a lot of local status, and that's something that, quite frankly, he didn't have before. It would appear, and same for Patrick Lancaster, it gives them something more, and that's for every Westerner who goes and joins the Western forces. Until there's so many of them, it doesn't really matter, and they don't get the kudos for that. But anyways, so you can see why they would be tempted. Their whole career basically is now based on it, and yeah, apparently Patrick Lancaster getting popular has upset Graham Phillips a bit. So yeah, tell me whether you think he's a journalist. I still think it's a bit of a bizarre war story. Unfortunate, and I hope the best for Aidan, that he is released, you know, as a POW, that he's either released in a prisoner exchange, or sometimes the word is not abused in captivity. He is a POW, legitimate POW under the Geneva Conventions, from what I can see. He's not a mercenary, and that he's released safe and sound as can be. And Graham Phillips, well, he's persona non grata, and he's walking around looking pretty much like a combatant to me during the war. So whatever happens to him, happens to him. Good luck. So let me know down below whether you think, well, that my assessment is correct about the Geneva Conventions, first of all, and whether this kind of content should ever be on YouTube. You know, is it freedom of speech to interrogate prisoner of war? And that also goes for Ukrainians, when Ukrainian forces, when they interrogate and publish interviews with Russian soldiers or members of the Russian forces there as well. And yeah, I will see you in another video. You know, under some of the others, especially Patrick Lancaster, because one of the big comments from people who disliked the video, clearly, was that, you know, you're not in Mariupol, you go to Mariupol. Now, think about it. I'm not in the Russian forces. I'm not a journalist either. So do you think I'm going to go with my big camera here and show up, not in Mariupol, actually where the border would be, and there would be first Ukrainian checkpoints to let out? I don't think the Ukrainians would let me leave and go across that border, because they wouldn't be able to guarantee my safety, obviously, and they'd probably be like, you're a foreigner, what the hell are you doing? But I guess if I could get that far, do you think that I would be allowed in? Well, they would let me in. I'm not sure what they would do to me afterwards. They certainly wouldn't let me walk around with my camera and film stuff and freely just put what I want up on YouTube. And actually also probably on the Ukrainian side, it would probably be the same, walking around my camera and filming sensitive stuff, or maybe an area that they've taken back without permission. There is martial law here as well in Ukraine, and that limits your ability to do that. Anyways, I just want to respond to that comment because I found it hilarious, in the sense that they don't understand that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia. It's not like you can just walk around, you know, go down to good old Mariupol, which has basically been obliterated, basically sacked, and just film what you want there and think it's all going to be fine. Anyways, see you in the next video. Slava Ukraini. Do побачення, до свидання from Berehove, beautiful Berehove in the west of Ukraine. Ciao, ciao.
SAR Experience.